The Week with Ben Ellis.
This is Switch.
Now, if you're anything like me and you are of a certain age, from the terraces of the Holt End, or even other parts of Villa Park about 25 years ago, to the tune of Deck the Halls, you sang that a certain someone walks on water. And we felt that then, we feel it now. And I can't believe it's been 50 years, but a book is out now, Brian Little, My Aston Villa, over 50 years of claret and blue memories. And the man himself has kindly joined us on the show today, as well as Peter White, who will introduce in just a moment. But first of all, Brian Little, hello.
Hi, Ben. You well?
I'm absolutely dandy. It's a bit starstruck as well, if I might say so. Yeah, I mean, 50 years, Brian. I mean, just that alone, an associate. I mean, you've obviously worked at other clubs, but
yeah.
The association with one club for that long is obviously very special.
Yeah, I feel very privileged. Obviously, I mean, I think I left home as a 15-year-old kid. Got on a train at Durham station and came down to Birmingham, not knowing anybody, not knowing who was meeting me. Travelled on my own. I mean, in an era where, you had an opportunity to leave home and get an apprenticeship to become a football player, which I wasn't sure whether I would actually ever be good enough to be. To then have, within 2 years, and that's the remarkable thing. At 15, I didn't even play for my county team. I only played for my regional team. 2 years later, I was playing in Aston Villa's first team, which was quite incredible, really. So, and it's just been one step after another. When I stopped playing, I worked in the shop. Then when I stopped that, I became the youth coach. And we're fortunate to work with people like Tony Daly, who came into the first team, played for England, Tony DeRigo, who went on to play for England. Then I left on my managerial role and came back as a manager. And 4 or 5 years ago now, I was asked if I would just help out as a sort of informal advisor around the place, and I'm still there. It's an incredible journey, and I don't think anyone else has got that type of. We've had some. Listen to me. There's been better football players than me, better youth coaches than me, better full-time managers than me, but I don't think there's anyone done everything as much as I have, and I'm obviously very, very proud to have done it all.
The epitome of having claret and blue blood, I would say, Brian.
It is now, very much so. I mean, when I left home, I was a staunch Newcastle fan. Obviously, most of my relatives were up that day. I lived in a little town called Newbiggin by the Sea when I was a very tiny boy. I lived about 50 yards from the beach, and I often look at pictures of Newbiggin now and think, I've got to go back there. I've got to go back and just walk around where I was where I was born and brought up. I am very much a claret and blue person now. I can talk about Aston Villa all day and all night, sort of thing. Hence sitting down with Pedro and writing a book. We just thought we're great mates. We've been mates for a long time now, and we just, I think in the lockdown, I wanted to talk to somebody, so I rang my mate up and said, "Hey, come on, I've got a bit of an idea here, and it's sprang from there." And I think both of us are quite proud with what we've done in a short period. And the reason we've done it in a short period is that we once we start talking to each other, we never shut up, sort of thing, And we produced something that we're very proud of. We really are. We're really proud of the book.
Well, the man you refer to as Pedro is on the line as well, Peter White. Now, as again, if you are of a certain age and you were leaving Villa Park many years ago, the idea that you could go into a newsagent, pick up a newspaper that was pink in colour, and you could read a report about the match you'd just been to, almost seems quite astonishing right now. But Pedro, as Brian refers to, Peter White, who worked for many years on the Sports Argus and was involved in this book as well. I'm going to call you Pedro if you don't mind. Pedro, welcome along.
Thanks very much, mate. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a great time. I was very, very lucky because I was a Villa fan all my life, basically. I lived in a little village in Warwickshire, and I used to do. There were no coaches in those days. It was a bus trip about 4 times a season. So I became a Villa fan when I could hardly walk. And then I landed the dream job in 1977. I joined the Evening Mail and was quickly made chief sports writer of the Sports Argus, which was absolutely fantastic. Couldn't believe it. So really enjoyed the time. Of course, that coincided with 81 and 82. And I was still working with Villa when my old mate Brian returned as manager in 94. I'm trying to think. November 94.
November 94, I think.
That's right. Yeah,
It was. The thing about that, I mean, we're not going to go too much into this because obviously we want people to buy the book, but you pick out the moments. I mean, Brian, obviously, the late Sir Doug Ellis, no relation to me, by the way. I mean, he obviously has played a huge part in your life, and your brother Alan's as well.
Yeah, I mean, right from the outset, I don't know what it was, but I always got on well with Mr. Ellis. He really wanted me to come to the club. I mean, as I've said, at 14, 15, I wasn't even playing for my county team, but Aston Villa were really, really keen to sign me. And when I came down and saw the club, I have to say, he didn't have to sell it to me because I fell in love with the club as soon as I saw it. I thought, oh, this is brilliant, But I've always had a really good relationship with Mr. Ellis. I always called him Mr. Ellis then. I never really called him Doug to his face. I would never have done that, to be honest, But either Mr. Ellis or Chairman, I would say. But we just had a lot of good times together, But he was hard work, I mean, he never left you alone, especially when you came back as a manager. Your phone you'd just be sort of sitting down for dinner. He seemed to know when you were having dinner because he would ring just as you were sitting down to have it, sort of thing. And we just, I really, really respected him. As I've said, when you work that closely with him, the managerial time, it got difficult after a while because you weren't left alone, And I think when you look back at his history over his managers, they either lasted a year or 3 years, So if you lasted a year, obviously you hadn't done very well. If you lasted 3 years, you tended to walk out because you'd had enough of them, sort of thing, which is a crazy sort of thing. But I became a really closer friend to him when I became this informal advisor because, the last few years of his life, he used to go to the games and I would often sit and look after him and I would talk to him and he'd often say to me, do you know if so-and-so is at the game today? For example, Paul McGrath, who we loved. Yeah. And I would say, yes, Paul McGrath's at the game today. He said, will you go and find him and fetch him to me so I can have a chat to him? And I used to do little things like that. And I think I didn't feel as if I was, serving on him. I just felt I respected him enough to say, to look after him really, sort of thing. But he was an incredible character. As I've said, could be very, very hard work, but we had some great laughs. I mean, he often used to say to me, will you take me to a game? And I'd say, yes. And he'd say to me, you're a really good driver, Brian. I said, well, wait, why don't you call me a good football manager, Mr. Ellis, please? Would you? But he'd always call me a good driver, So, but that was just him, He was just a really good character, in all fairness,
And in those latter years, those matches must have been a tough watch. They were for me, as a fan, and the feeling about the place as well. And when you think if you're sitting with the man and you know what he put, I mean, you say what you want. He ate, breathed, lived, and slept Aston Villa his entire life. So when it all started to go wrong around about the time of the relegation, just as a friend to him, this is hard to watch, but you were there to watch it with him.
Yeah, it was I mean, the 2015-16 season was a very difficult season. I mean, when I was 15 and I joined Aston Villa, they were relegated to the 3rd division for the first time in their history. But I have to say, even that season wasn't as bad for some reason. Yeah. The way football had evolved, and the kudos that's involved with being around the Premier League and everything, made the 2015-16 season probably the most difficult season in the 50 years that I've either been around the club or supported the club. I think it was an unbelievably sad season, one which is obviously reflected upon in the book on one or two occasions. Because the strange thing was, if you look at that team, a good half of that team have gone on and had good careers.
Yeah.
But as a team, they just did not gel together. So
yeah.
So the recruitment was to a point almost right, but it didn't have the ingredients of a team. It had an ingredients of individuals. And we talk about that in the book and things like that. So, but I still think that was in my time around the club, and it's 52 years nearly now. I still think that was the most difficult season that I've either watched the team play or been part of the team.
And of course,
Yes, sorry. Can I just say there, Ben? Sorry, can I just say there that there is actually a picture in the book of myself at the first game at Bournemouth, smiling with the manager, and I think that was about the only time he smiled that year, because I think that they won the opening game of the season. I think our next victory was in January.
Yes, and as well, not wishing to dwell on that, but also, Brian, that was the 20-year anniversary of what was possibly the best season, 95-96. Certainly for me as a fan, anyway. If people chart back this, surviving relegation on the final day of the previous season, not in the way they did at West Ham. It was they got a result at Norwich, as I recall. Another results was, so they stayed up on the last day, but then were pretty much the surprise package the following season, where finishing fourth, League Cup, FA Cup semi-final. And you just talked about the 2015-16 of not having that team there. The players that came in and the way it all came about. I mean that was a real team, as far as I can remember. I mean, I would remember.
Good. I mean,
sorry, I was saying I remember the highlight of my week was, and I'm giving away my age, it was finishing school on a Friday night thinking, we got tomorrow and we'll definitely give them a game and win, lose or draw. And that was a great feeling.
It was. I think the thing was, Ron had left a really good team, but it was a team that needed some tweaking and changing around. I mean, it left me Paul McGrath, who was an absolute legend. People like Andy Townsend, Dwight York, who hadn't quite established himself in the team at that time. Hugo Egiol, God bless him, who was a great player, and Bosnich in goal. It was all there. We had some great players, and I let great players go, but it was time for them to go. It was a little sort of period where perhaps they got too comfortable together. So we changed a few things, and the signings like Gareth Southgate, for example, Mark Draper, Alan Wright, Gary Charles, Tommy Johnson, Savo Milosevic. That started. The best thing about that season was on the opening day we beat the Manchester United team that went on to win the league. With the greatest crop of youngsters that we've seen in the history of British football, I think, really, but that 3-1 win against Man United, the opening game of the season, just really did make everybody sit up and think, whoa, hang on, there's a different team here. But I thank Ron, and I've said this a few times, Ron left me some really good players. And I think when I left John Gregory some really good players. And I think that's really one of the philosophies that you should try and always achieve as a man. Management has a lifespan now, and it's not often a long lifespan. So you go into a club, you try and pick out what are the best players that have been left for you there. You try to add to them, and at some stage you will move on anyway. And what you've got to try and do then is leave a little bit of a legacy for the next man who can add his little piece to it again. And I think in the 90s, Ron Atkinson to myself to John Gregory, I think that was a spell where that happened, and even Martin O'Neill took that bit on from there as well. So it was a good period. It was a great period. I had a wonderful team, wonderful set of players. The team spirit was incredible. Ian Taylor and myself now, who spend a lot of time together, we often just, something will happen, we'll go, it reminds us of Gary Charles, or that will remind us of Tommy Johnson. Oh, Mark Draper more than anyone else, because he was as daft as a brush. It was great fun, but Drapes. But we had a real brilliant team spirit, which is part and parcel of being successful, to be honest.
And I'll get both your opinion on this. I mean, you talk about the period with Ron, yourself, and John. Do you think it's a period that should have produced more than just 2 League Cups?
Well, John got to the FA Cup final, didn't he? And that was a little bit unfortunate. I think that really top spot was beginning to become more and more difficult. You know, you were seeing that the money side of things was coming into the game and taking over. But it was still a period where you could be very, very competitive. You know, and I think, you know, it is. Could we have had more? Quite possibly, but we weren't far off. You know, there was something that was building on there.
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, I mean, today, if you finish 4th off top or 5th off top or 2nd off top, you know, you are among the top echelons of the whole of Europe now.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, so we weren't far off that. We're certainly closer to it then. But, you know, there are signs that at the moment we have the ingredients around the club for us to be able to climb back to that level, you know. I mean, and that's basically because we have owners who now can match other people and other owners at other clubs, and that's probably not been there for quite some time, you know. So I think it was a period there that we were competitive in, but I believe, you know, a decade or so on now, there are signs that we are moving back towards that bracket, which will be a tremendous achievement if we do get there.
Pedro, I don't know about you, but I remember going back to that time thinking it was just a week after the League Cup final, and I remember leaving Old Trafford thinking, how have we just lost that semi-final 3-0?
Yeah, exactly.
I thought we played really well. I think Liverpool were a bit of the nemesis that season, I think I seem to remember. And I think one of my, and you mentioned it, I think one of my most joyous moments of the whole Brian Little era was the following season, 1-0, Ian Taylor stabbing the ball into the net with about 5 minutes to go, I think it was. I think that from the previous season, getting some batterings from Liverpool, we've just beat them 1-0. I just think that's really satisfying. Coming onto the book, and there is a name I'm going to throw at you, Brian, which I think you're probably expecting, and that's Ron Saunders. And
well, Ron was a tough man to deal with, and he managed in an era where, you know, he was king. You know, I mean, he was king of the castle. You know, I mean, outside of the chairman who owned the club, you know, nothing went on without Ron Saunders saying yes to or no to, or and he dealt with at times, you know, a very strong hand, and he wasn't. I think as you move on and years later on, you sort of begin to understand what he was trying to do. His way of motivating people like myself, Gary Shaw, Tony Morley, was not to be very pleasant to us. In fact, he used to sort of make us feel. He would say things like, I need to see you today. And then he'd call me in, for example, and he'd say, I've had an offer for you this week. And I'd go, oh, yeah, who's that? He said, and he'd say, someone who was like in the bottom 3 of the 3rd division or somebody like that. He would say, Grimsby, I want to buy. And I'm going, but I, you know, he used to walk out his office like feeling angry, thinking, what's he doing that for? But he just used to do things like that just to wind you up. And in all fairness, I used to go out on a Saturday saying, I'll show him what he's on, you know, like, but at the time, people like myself, Tony Morley and Gary Shaw and people like that would be like coming out of his office going, well, what's going on here? You know, I played really well, but he's destroying me here. But that he felt with people who of a certain type of player, he just used to wind them up. And you know, it was hard to deal with, to be honest, at the time. And at the time, I didn't understand it, but I know for a fact that it motivated me. So that's how we used to deal with things, and we used to have to get on with it. And then, you know, he'd be as nice as ninepence to Dennis Mortimer and Ken McNaught and all them because he liked them, you know. And he knew he didn't have to. They were different type of personalities, so it's all man management, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so he was good like that. He wasn't a bad man. He was just, you know, he's just difficult to get on with, really.
Yeah.
Pedro, if it was any consolation, Brian, he was exactly the same with the press. He had his favourites.
I can imagine that.
And I wasn't one of them.
The famous line to Barry Davis after the Ipswich game. We just stared him out, didn't he? And he just said, "You want to bet against us?" And I think there was also that famous story, Pedro, in the 81 season on the Friday when he told Tony Morley, "You're not playing at Everton tomorrow," which is your team. Just to, I got my doubts about you, and then he told him he changed his mind at lunchtime, and 5 minutes in, I think Morley scores the goal of the season. I think the celebration was to Ron Saunders to say,
That was the way he used to That was the way he used to motivate people. I mean, like I say, as a journalist, he certainly had his favourites. I wasn't one of them. I think Ron was the only person that banned me from Bodymore Heath once. And Tom Ross tells a very, very funny story about that, where he reckoned I was hiding behind a hedge and camouflaging myself so I could get in. But I mean, Ron was great. He was a tremendous manager. I'd got a lot of respect for him, a lot of time for him. But then when he suddenly left and dear Tony Barton came in, it was chalk and cheese, because Tony was a perfect gentleman. He was brilliant with the press. I would imagine he was brilliant with the players. And they both had their successes, which was brilliant.
Do you think the way the media is, and in particular social media is today, that it just wouldn't take a Ron Saunders anymore? Brian?
Well, go on, Pedro.
No, sorry, I was going to say, I mean, for journalists, for the press these days, the game has changed so much because we had access to players. I mean, I could ring up Bodymore Heath. There was a telephone in the corridor at Bodymore Heath. Brian will probably remember. There was two. There was a manager's office and one in the corridor. And if you wanted to speak to a player, you would just ring up that number, and Peter With could answer the phone. So, oh, Pete, is Dennis Mortimer there? Yeah, hang on, mate. Dennis, phone for you. Whitey on the phone. And that's how we worked somehow. And after the game, we'd all go for a drink in the players' lounge, and then we'd go up the Cork and Bottle or up to Hort's Wine Bar or wherever. But these days, I mean, you just do not get those access to players. That is the biggest change that I've seen in football from the 80s to now. And it's a shame, because I enjoyed that period, and alas, I don't think any young journalist now is going to have those similar facilities.
So what happens now with the book? When is it out? How can we get hold of it, Brian?
Well, we're having an opening evening down in Southampton, because obviously I want Pedro to do on the 20th. The book is available at the moment on our website. So if you look on my Twitter page or Instagram page or Facebook page, the directions are there to go and order it online. They're pre-sales at the moment. Obviously, it will continue once the book is out, but we're releasing everything on the 24th, which is next Friday. And really, it's quite simple. There will be functions. The first function, as I've said, is down in Southampton. There are other functions which we are now working at. Before too long, hopefully, I'll be around Aston Villa itself on a match day selling. So hopefully, I'll get into the Holt End, which I've done on several occasions in the past, and being amongst the fans and meet them as they're coming in. And there's an opportunity for them to buy the book there. But at the moment, it's online. And from the 24th, there will be functions on at supporters associations and different games around Villa Park where people can purchase the book face to face, sort of thing. So, that's where we're at the moment. We've had an incredible response prior to the book going up for sale officially, and I daren't show you my study now because there's just parcels all over the place ready to be sent out. Pedro come with this wonderful idea that they should be personally signed by me, which has taken up the last 3 days of my life. It's been really good. We're enjoying it. It seems to be the right time for a book like this. And as I've said, I don't think anyone else, has quite the association with the club that I've had. I mean, like I've said, there's been better people in different positions than me, players, managers, youth team, coaches. But I am the blessed one. I feel blessed. I feel like I still look back at that day I left home with £1.10 in my pocket off my mum and dad. And, I still thank them, God rest their souls, that, they were happy to let me leave home with 15. And I remember how sick I felt on the journey, it was really sort of, and at 15-year-old, I didn't know who was meeting him at the station or anything like that, So you're going into a massive world of nothing in those days, of not knowing, what was going to happen, into a man's world as it was in those days. I remember the first time I went home 3 months after being at Aston Villa, everybody thought I was a completely different person. You've lost your accent. They'd say, well, I don't think I have, but compared to my mates I had, and I'd just grown up so much because I was in a real man's environment at the time, real tough environment, and I was 15, and all my mates were still at school because they hadn't got a job to go to. So I think that was the last year you could actually leave at 15 before you would take exams. So many things gone in my favour in many ways. I've had quite a few ups and downs in my life in terms of, getting injured early at 25, 26 and never playing again. Mm-hmm. But I've always seemed to bounce back somehow. I don't have this bounce back ability thing within me. So I feel, as I've said, and I know I've said it several times, I feel very blessed to have had the career I've had so far. And long may it continue, because another 25 years with me and Pedro could be writing another one. You don't know. It's 25 years ago. It's 25 years ago that we wrote our first book together, The Return of the Little Villain, which we did on holiday, and hence in Spain, hence him being called Pedro Blanco.
Pedro.
You see.
Okay, wonderful stuff. Brian Little, my Aston Villa, over 50 years of Claret and Blue memories. The man himself, along with Peter White, we now know him as Pedro, we always will. It is available through those channels. And just from my point of view, both of you, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Ben.